Next, we have Mohammad Naeem. Mohammad Naeem is a community organizer working to serve marginalized communities. Raised in Queens, New York, shout out New York, Mohammad has seen firsthand the recurring victimhood of domestic violence, incarceration, and poverty. This history drives Mohammad and his work. He has shared many stages alongside Nobel Peace Prize laureates, political leaders, and community stakeholders, where he pushes for laws that uphold gender equity and civic engagement. So please give it up for Mohammad.
Well, we got a full house. All right. When I was backstage, there were some empty seats in the back. I guess some of you really were out late last night. I often reminisce about our arrival as a family on American shores. I remember the sliding steel gates, the mosaic of cheers, the shuddering Kodaks, a new beginning that was promised by stars and stripes. I remember sitting on my father's lap, comforted by the warmth of his protection, endowed with carrying the innocence of his history. The story of tribes and empires, of green prairies and blue mountains, of dusty roads and busy markets, but also the story of a lost youth, empty gaps in time that were suspended by the cruelty of war, in a land that was lost in its own harshness. Yet on that night, there we were, father and son, believing that we could bend this past into fortune, hoping that God's providence was with us. Unfortunately, this was a future that was never realized. When I was 12 years old, my father went to prison for taking part in the heroin drug trade. And on that morning, I saw my father pinned to the ground while the barrel of a gun was held to his head, as I could hear my mother's echo of her crying through our living room. And as she shielded my little brother, who was 4 years old at the time, and my infant sister. And so for the next few years, I'd see my father sparingly. And because of that distance, I'd grown to detest him for stealing away my youthful innocence. I had become the silent joke, the forgotten child, the kid who'd pedal between laundromat and laundromat just to find some lost change because he knew that he was now responsible for his family. These sequences of space and time, of lost hopes and torn dreams, of welfare lines and odd jobs left me frustrated and angry and tired. I viewed my father the same way the world did, a criminal, lost in his way, forgetting a family that had supported him, of a nation that had embraced him, but also leaving a son who had loved him. And so as I hobbled into my teenage years, he would become a stranger, a distant thought, as I avoided his collect calls, neglected those visiting hours, trying to move past the ghostly image of an absent parent. Yet the decision to treat him that way, the idea that I could somehow condemn our relationship or uncoil it, just felt strange. Yet I was lost in the makings of my own arrogance, caught between the darkest shades of my own ego, but also the lighter stations of my own consciousness, veiled away from my father's genuinely innate humanity. And so because of this, I ignored every kind of silver lining that he tried to show me during those years, every form of love, in the ways that he knew how. And these hidden memories somehow began to surface a few months ago, each representing an artifact of love. At his first court hearing, my father walked in, wrapped in a wrinkly orange jumpsuit. And he walked just in front of us, and he looked right at me. And he puts his hands up while his feet and his wrists were both shackled, and he just banged it. That scene never forgot me because he was trying to brush his vulnerability against mine. He tried to somehow shorten the distance in that courtroom between us. Later, during the few visits I did have with him in prison, he would walk in pressed against other inmates as he would look around, trying to find me. And once he did, he would just glow with relief knowing that this was a brief lull from the bars and the concrete that he now inhabited. And yet he never admitted. I'd always purchase food for him, but he never asked for it. Burgers, chicken wings. He loved chicken wings in prison. Mountain Dew, Kit Kat, and Crunch. And yet he would always offer it to me first. He would never take a stab at it until he would offer it to me first. And I'd always decline, knowing that this was his lone chance at a decent meal. And so I remember the day he was released, stepping off an old tin Greyhound bus, wearing the biggest smile, and quicker than I could say a word, he embraced me in a warm hug. Yet the intimacy of that moment had marshaled the ending of his time away. Yet for some reason, I stood there with heavy legs, not believing that this could be the end. And yet, a few months ago, as I pieced together these seemingly unrelated memories, it spoke of a much different truth. It was less a story of tragedy and more a story of love between a father who'd made a mistake and a son who was lost in his own arrogance. Less the story of a criminal and more the story of a human being who, despite absence, tried to love his son in the best way he knew how. By being vulnerable and by being kind and by being joyous. The vulnerability to ask for forgiveness inside a prison, lost amidst the haziness of trauma. The kindness to share a meal inside a prison, lost amidst the makings or the declining hour of a clock. The joy to express intimacy at a bus stop, lost amidst the strangeness of his freedom. And collectively, this was, in the words of Dr. King, love in action. A cosmic realization that was finally peeking through the resistance that I had built over so many years. And so I questioned myself. I questioned this life that I had come to live, building for myself this makeshift of a spiritual prison, leaving me weak and hateful and suffering. In the words of J. Cole, I had come a long way, but I went the wrong way. But why? Why was I so blind in condemning my father's love? And to explain that, let me share with you a story. There's an ancient Indian tale about gods that had huddled together and wanted to hide the secret to life, love. So one of them said, let's hide it in the skies. And they said, no, humans will be able to fly that far. A few others go, let's hide it in the bottom of the sea. Some of them went, I think humans might get there too. And then Rama, one of the gods, goes, let's hide it inside of human beings themselves, inside of their hearts, because they'll never know to look for it there. Folks, I finally looked here. And perhaps this was the point. Perhaps I needed to go the wrong way to find the right way, realizing that love harbored this intricate duality, that to feel one way meant the opposite too existed. In other words, love is the gravel of our lives. It is the story and the journey between weakness and vulnerability, between hate and kindness, between suffering and joy. And so to fall into love, to be in love, to love, we must be willing to accept this contrast and travel it from a beginning that is provincial and only about us individually towards an end that is spacious, forming partnership and friendship and marriage and community, and yes, this conference too. And if you're patient enough, you'll notice that love's wisdom whispers, never shouts. You'll hear that love always beats in two, never one, just like our hearts. Love becomes a conversation. It becomes a way of life that defies space and time, race and tribe, color and gender, and in my case, incarceration and freedom. And so when I think of my life, and I think of this moment, I am reminded still of that little boy who sat on his father's lap. It was the same little boy who sat in that courtroom and in that prison and stood at that bus stop. Father and son, indeed believing that God's providence, His secret, love, exists in us all. Thank you. And in the words of the legendary Cole, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, love yours. Love yours. Love yours. Thank you.